He hated pretty much everybody, distrusted pretty much everybody, was obviously a very lonely and miserable man, and you know, lashed out at everything he didn't see as familiar, and you know, let's face it, straight white wasp.
Yep.
You know, it's sort of which is desperately sad, because he did have this prodigious imagination. He did have this ability to tell really weird, unsettling stories.
There are a few things that make me happier than when I meet a creator whose work I enjoy and they turn out to be awesome. And that happened here. I sit down with Emmy Award-winning creator Lynne Hardy. She may be best known for her work on Cthulhu, whether it be Call of Cthulhu, Actung Cthulhu, or her most recent work for Chaosium, The Children of Fear. We have an interesting discussion about being a woman in the gaming industry, and make sure you stick around for our discussion about how problematic Lovecraft can be and how she reconciles that. Lynne was a great guest, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. Okay, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Lynne.
Third Floor Wars delivers interviews, insights, and discussions about everything hitting the tabletop. Rulebooks, plastic models, dice, and cards in hand. Let the gaming begin. Tabletop games let you escape and unleash grand battles and regale epic tales of adventure with your friends. If you love gaming and learning from players, designers, experts, and creators, you are in the right place. Pull up a chair. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk Podcast.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today we talk to author, designer, and associate editor for Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu line, Lynne Hardy. Lynne has been a part of many of the games we love. She was nominated for an Emmy for her own game and worked with many publishers like Modiphius, Pelgrane Press, and Green Ronin. She is now in a leadership role with Chaosium, helping to shape the future of our beloved Call of Cthulhu. Lynne, welcome to the Third Floor.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I've really been looking forward to this. Before we get into all of the goodies, though, we've got to do your origin story. So at some point, you had no idea you could grab a sheet of paper, write a few numbers down on it, roll dice, and pretend to be other people. And then one day it was shown to you. I'd love to go back there if we could.
Well, I mean, let's face it. I think most of us have actually been role-playing a heck of a lot longer than we'll be prepared to admit to. This was a conversation that came up the other day, as a result of Children of Fear, which I'm sure we'll get to later. But I remember when the Monkey TV series was on here in Britain, and I remember us all taking on roles from that and running around the playground, live role-playing, let's face it, although we would have called it make-believe back then. You know, I also remember getting to play Han Solo while my best friend was Princess Leia. So, you know, we've always done it. Humans tell stories. We've always done this. So, I mean, let's face it, most of us have been role-playing longer than we've officially been role-playing.
Very true.
But in terms of tabletop, I would have to say my first awareness of it was E.T., which I am old enough to have actually gone to the pictures to see when it was released.
I did the same.
But I had flu, and my best friend then insisted I had to go with it, even though I could barely stand up. I think, was about 10 years old? If that. And I have very, very hazy memories of E.T. I really don't remember much of it, apart from the bit where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, which for years I wasn't convinced I hadn't actually dreamed, because I was somewhat feverish and delirious. And the kid in the row behind me kicking me in the back going, wake up, you're supposed to be watching this. And I had no idea who they were, and didn't really work. So I don't really remember much. Those are my two abiding memories of E.T., really. Dungeons and Dragons and this annoying kid. So, you know, I was aware of it. But I grew up in the East Midlands in a mining village, at the time the largest village in England. And, you know, it wasn't something that you really dealt with. There was, I think it was a Taggart, where there was a lunatic who was a live role player running around the steam ducts and tunnels and things, killing people. So, you know, we didn't quite have the satanic panic to the level that you did in the States, but there was always this, oh, it's a bit scary and weird. And then I went to university, And I lived in a place called Ethel Williams Hall, which was one of the halls of residence for Newcastle University. And it was out away from the city centre, away from the main campus. And the building was amazing. It had several really old bits. The bit I lived in first was the vicarage. There was another bit that goodness knows how old it was, but it was incredibly old, called North House. A huge chunk of it was sort of like a 1920s, 1930s nursing home that had been converted into a student hall of residence. And then all of it had been kind of joined together at some point. So it was an amazing building, but it was 3 miles out of the city centre, and the metros didn't run particularly late. So it tended to have quite a vibrant little social life of its own. So for Freshers Week, they had lots of parties in the bar. It had its own little bar. And I went down and I put on my Seattle Seahawks American football top, which at the time was actually really hard to get hold of in this country, because you could get the Dolphins, you could get Washington, you could get the Cowboys and the Raiders and everything. But, to get a Seahawks one, you really had to be hunting for it, kind of thing.
That's funny.
And I'm at the first night party at Freshers Week. And these guys sidle over to me looking slightly shifty and a little bit embarrassed. And it turns out they were big American football fans. They were actually on the university's American football team. And we got chatting about that. And it turned out they were gamers. And they invited me to join their group. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So looking back as an adult now, Lynne, obviously, it had an impact, right? Mm-hmm. That was, your first exposure, but you played several games after that and continued on. Any sense of maybe what it was that hooked you from the beginning now looking back on it?
Well, it was a chance to spend time with friends.
Yeah.
And it was that whole creative storytelling element. When I was very young, I was well into the famous five, Enid Blyton stuff, problematical as it is, but that was what we had when I was a child. I was very much into horses and ballet stories as well. And then one of my school teachers got us to read The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper.
Wow.
And that was kind of it. That was the slippery slope. I just started devouring fantasy, science fiction. I just really got into all the dragon stuff with Anne McCaffrey. And that was, it was the opportunity to then tell stories in worlds like that with friends was the thing that really hooked me.
Oh, that's great. Now, I would assume at some point during your gaming career, you first came across Call of Cthulhu. So I'd be curious to know when that happened.
Well, it wasn't my first Chaosium game. The very first role-playing game I played actually was RuneQuest. And that's nice. Because our main GM was a guy called John Wilson. And he'd run role-playing games since he was, early teenager at school. And RuneQuest was his game. I think it was second edition. Mm-hmm. And somebody'd stolen all his books, and he used to pretty much run it from memory. So I inherited a character called Shirley the Dwarf, who apparently had been male but then became female, but nobody was entirely certain because of the beards. It's confusing. And that was great. I loved that. And then John picked up Call of Cthulhu from Games Workshop before they just exclusively started doing their own stuff. And Call of Cthulhu was what we used to run as light relief from our long-running campaigns.
What was the other campaign like?
Well, I say light relief. It was change of pace, I think, would probably be more accurate. Okay. Because most of us in that group were GMs, that was my first experience. After about a couple of months, maybe not even that, they came to me and said, we think it's time you started running something. We want to play Red Box D&D. We haven't played it since we started. That's going to be your game. Nice. So that's how I got into that. I was very much encouraged. And there was really only one person who didn't GM, and that's just because they really weren't interested. They just liked telling the story side of things. They didn't want to have to be running a game. So, we did huge numbers of different games and settings. And because it was a hall of residence and people moved through and people graduated, we got new people coming in, people leaving. So, for the 3 years I lived there, we had numerous people joining and we tried all sorts of different stuff. So it was really great. But no, Call of Cthulhu was our light relief change of pace game.
So one thing that's interesting to me, Lynne, is, I've been interviewing the focus of this podcast, or a new focus for this podcast has been interviewing creators, especially in the RPG space like yourself. And I can count on one hand the number of women I've had a chance to interview. And, you know, you and I being of similar age, you know, going back then to, you know, you playing tabletop gaming, I mean, it wasn't until well into college that I had my chance of role playing with a woman at the table. It was male dominated. Were you the only woman in the group, or was your group, because of kind of the confines of the resident hall, a little bit more diverse?
Start with I was. The next year, Philippa joined us. She was a new intake. So there was two of us, which was great. But no, I mean, when I started, I mean, we were there. And it was interesting because I also did live role playing slightly later. After, you know, I started doing live role playing after one of the people who joined our group. He was a sub-warden, so he was doing his PhD, but he'd been at Durham University, who had Treasure Trap, which is like the oldest live role playing thing in the country. And he sort of took us over there. And I started doing that. And the interesting thing has always been, there's always been way more women doing LARP, noticeably so, or at least at the time. And then, of course, you had slightly fewer women doing tabletop gaming. And we were eventually joined by a third girl. I think her name was Gillian, sort of like just before I graduated. So, you know, we were kind of getting towards parity in the group by that point. I'd always been a bit of a tomboy, so, you know, I was kind of used to being the only girl in amongst the guys. Sure. Sort of like, that was kind of my permanent state of being.
That's funny. It's very fascinating to me because I'm also a war gamer, play miniature games, right? And, you know, I took a huge break from role playing. And then when the pandemic hit, my interest was rekindled for obvious reasons, because I could play that online as opposed to playing, you know, war games online. And first thing I noticed, by no means am I going to try to pretend that RPGs are where they need to be. As far as diversity and inclusion, but boy, they're way ahead of wargaming and a lot of other tabletop gaming. And I wonder whether you have any thoughts on that. Why is it do we seem to see role-playing games to be farther along on this metric versus some other tabletop games? Do you have any sense of why that might be, or guesses?
I mean, I don't know if I'm right here, but I think it's the increased ease with which you can create them. Because let's face it, we are in an amazing place at the moment where you can write your own games, you can, you know, produce them to really professional standards with minimum really of software and training, and you can get them out there, you can share them, you can sell them on digital platforms. I mean, none of that was available to us in the early 90s. So, you know, I think there's that. So women are producing the sorts of games they want to play. They can get them out to people so that they're shared. And I think that has helped hugely in broadening the appeal.
Yeah.
Having game shops that also don't smell like a dirty pile of laundry has also been really nice, and, you know, has helped attract in people. Because I remember when I first started doing this, we had Time Slip Comics, which sold role-playing games. We had a very grungy Forbidden Planet that sold role-playing games, and they didn't smell good. They were dark and they were dingy.
It's very true. Who knew that deodorant would be one of the innovations that would make the gaming more inclusive?
But it was just the sort of like, you know, it was like really going into a dungeon just to go buy your gaming products, which was, you know, it was interesting, and it was a bit intimidating because they would quite often be, you know, underneath comic shops, and you'd be, you know, it'd be very judgmental that you were in there in the first place in some cases. But yeah, so I think the whole ability to self-publish and self-market and get your games out there has really helped tremendously, because there's much more variety of things that you can play and explore.
Yeah, and then the popularity, right? So the pie has gotten bigger, so more people are playing, which I think makes things a lot easier. So, guys, the Insider Insight series is my opportunity to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations. So we're going to take a quick break, and before we jump into Lovecraft, I want to talk to Lynne about stuff that she's done outside of the Lovecraftian universe. We'll be right back.
If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
Howdy friends, Craig here. You deserve a new playmat. Here on the third floor, we use Mats by Mars. They are scratch resistant, waterproof, wet erase marker compatible, almost free of glare and lighter than neoprene. Mats by Mars gives you over 40 designs to choose from. You pick a mat, pick a design, and then you pick an overlay, like one for Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars Legion, or even Malifaux 3rd Edition. Those overlays will really speed up your deployment and make the placement of objective markers so easy. Use our promotion code in the show notes to get a 10% discount on your first order. In the notes of your order, you can even request the third floor logo on your mat for free. That makes the best mat in the business even a little better. So get some new mats, save yourself some money, and help support the show. Go to matsbymars.com. All the details are in the show notes, including the discount code. So I mentioned in the introduction that Lynne had been Emmy nominated, which is a pretty big freaking deal, and was for your it was for your own game, Cogs, Cates, and Swordsticks, which once I booked Lynne, it was really the first time I'd come across the game and paid any attention to it. So for those listening, Lynne, can we get an idea of what the game is?
Yes, it's a game of steampunk pulp adventure in the Empire of Steam.
And where did that come from?
Oh, it was one of those things. I think it was when we'd been up in Edinburgh to a games convention, and we were on the train on the way back, and they'd kind of had sort of like a game jam thing as part of the convention. Not that they called them those then, but that's effectively what it was. And we were just, me and my husband were sort of spitballing game ideas, and we were just talking about games that you could do that were really simple. And also around the same time, we'd done a lot of live role playing. That's how I met my husband, was through Treasure Trap at Durham University.
Very nice.
So, that was always in there. And we'd been doing a lot of live role playing. We'd been involved in a game that was run by friends of ours called Company of Crimson, which was a homebrew LARP where we'd get dressed up in Victorian kit. We'd go and take over a youth hostel for the weekend, and we'd have bizarre adventures. And it was great fun. But of course, at that point, that was starting to lead into steampunk. And we went to the first really big steampunk convention in Britain, which was called the Asylum, and it was in Lincoln in September. And it was called the Asylum because it was actually held in what were the old asylum buildings in Lincoln at the back of Lincoln Castle, which had hilariously been converted by the council into a wedding and sort of general venue. I mean, it was a great place to actually have like a fledgling sort of like convention where all the steampunks were coming together. And what we saw there when we were sort of helping out on our friend's stand and various other bits and bobs was that there were a lot of people who were interested in role playing, but didn't really know where to start.
Yeah.
And at the time you had Victoriana, which is a great game, because I edited the 3rd edition, so I'm not going to say anything bad about it. It's great. And there was Airship Pirates. But, both of them are big, quite intimidating books if this is something that you've never done before and you don't know anybody who has. So sort of building on the conversations we'd had on the train back from Edinburgh and various other things that we were doing, my husband and I got talking, and it was a case of, I kind of quite feel like designing something that would be an introductory game for cosplayers, effectively. They really like their steampunk stuff, but they don't know anything about gaming. So that's what we did. And, we tested it at the Asylum, and the original version of it was put out on a CD that I sold at various conventions because that, print on demand was not that common and was actually quite pricey. And I didn't want to end up stuck with a whole load of books, whereas CDs, you could just like burn off a few and it didn't take up quite as much space. So, it was very well. It went down very well. People really enjoyed it. But it was very much like this little wee independent thing. And I had no clue how to market stuff. That's not where my strengths lie.
Sure.
But I started using it as a writing sample. So I sent it to Walt at Cubicle 7, and that actually got me the Victoriana editing gig. I sent it to Chris Birch at Modiphius, and that's what got me on into Actung Cthulhu. So, it was a very valuable game for that. And at the time, Actung Cthulhu was being produced in association with Chronicle City and Angus Abrason, and it was printed up. It was actually turned into a real book. And I was very lucky that Dr. Jeff and Kit Cox let me raid their art back catalogue and use pieces of those, because they were friends we had from the steampunk world. And there was this book, and then it was entered for the Ennies, and it was entered, sort of like family game, which I hadn't intentionally designed it as, but I suppose because I'd designed it as an introductory game, it by default really was a family game. So that was an amazing honour, and it was really great. And of course, it was lovely to go to Gen Con, and that was interesting because I hadn't been to Gen Con in years. I'd gone to one in 1994, and Wizards of the Coast had paid for me to go because I used to run Talislanta for them at conventions. And then I went back again for that one, which was probably 2013. And just the change in the demographic was lovely, because there were more women, there were more children. It was much more of a family thing than when I'd been at Milwaukee in 94. Mm-hmm. So, so that all kind of ties in together. But no, it was amazing. And it was interesting, I'd be on the stand with what we were told by one person who came to the stand, the most aggressively British poster they'd ever seen, which is the teapot cover of the game. And we'd be in steampunk costume, and it was interesting the fact that women were coming to the stand to talk to me about it.
Nice. And
wanting to, and we were running little short 10-15 minute demos of it so people could get, and it was girlfriends and partners who were coming, not hardcore gamers. So that was lovely. And then over the next few years, you'd get people who'd bought it, and they would come back and tell me how their children were using it, how teachers were using it to teach children about creative storytelling and history. And there was one amazing story where there was a lovely couple who used to come and see me every year I was there. And the husband's mum had a stroke, and she lost most of her ability to speak. But their son was using the game with his grandmother to help her regain her language skills.
My Lord.
Kind of left me a sobbing wreck behind.
I bet. I get emotional thinking about it.
Yeah, these are and this is the power of gaming that you don't always realize, and you have no idea once you've written something how people are going to use it, and it's always fascinating to find out what people get up to. So, it was never designed to be a blockbuster seller. It was designed to be fun. The whole gag was that all you needed was a napkin and a sugar cube, and you wrote your character on the napkin, and you put dots on your sugar cube and rolled that as your D6. And yet it's those who know about it, it seems to be very beloved. And of course, I'm eternally grateful to it, because it really got me back into the gaming industry after I'd had a break of a few years.
Yeah. So looking back on it then, Lynne, what do you think made it so, it sounds approachable might be the right word for describing it. What is it in the game that made it so approachable?
I think just because it was so simple. It uses a D6 because both my husband and I are gigantic fans, obviously, West End games, Star Wars, and Ghostbusters. It's kind of like you have your D6. But the D6 was chosen because it's an easy die to get hold of. Most people will have one. They turn up in Crackers. You've got them in any other board game. Bookshops will have them. You don't have to go somewhere specialist to get hold of them. So that was one reason. And it is very based on storytelling. It's not mechanically very heavy. I can get all of the rules on one side of A4 paper, and it literally has one table.
Wow.
So that was kind of the key to it. And it is very storytelling based. There's a little bit of rolling. It's heavily weighted in the player's favours because you're heroes, you're supposed to be succeeding.
Yeah.
But when things go wrong, they really go wrong. So you get that real sort of pulp, catastrophic disaster, amazing glory kind of thing. And it just romps along at a fair old pace. And you need very, very little in the way of stuff to actually run it. And I mean,
Right.
I know people who used to take it on road trips, and it would be the game they'd play over lunch while they were stopped at the diner, going to wherever they were going.
That's fantastic. So it sounds to me like it also became a calling card for you and allows you to kind of get gigs in the business. So what was next then? So when you look at yourself from a design perspective, what was your next big gig?
I mean, Victoriana 3rd edition, which helped sort of hone my editing skills to a large extent. But really, the next big one was Actung Cthulhu.
Yeah. And it, I mean, so you're not officially trained for this. It's something that you've acquired over time. When you again look back on it, Lynne, what do you think has allowed you to find homes there, to find jobs as editors and designers and creators? Is there something, because it's a lot. If you're like me, you look in the past and you go, oh, okay, yeah, now that makes sense. I can piece it together in retrospect. Have you done that and kind of figured out like where these skills came from or how they got honed?
I'm afraid I was one of those precocious, horribly annoying children that was good at pretty much everything apart from sport. I was okay at field hockey. I was a demon left back and goalkeeper at field hockey, but no other sport really kind of. I was also, despite being incredibly short, I was actually pretty reasonably good at basketball as well for a while, until I fell over and gave myself concussion and was slightly.
That explains a lot.
Never quite so good after that. Yeah, well, we used to have to play in bad weather. We played indoors in what was called the barn, and it was like a concrete floor, and they put this like the thinnest layer of AstroTurf on it. And my sneaker got caught on the AstroTurf, and I went over backwards and knocked myself out, and just lay on the ground while everybody kept playing around me. It's like because that was British schooling. It's like, is she dead? No, keep going. So no, I'm afraid I was a horribly precocious child. So I always wrote essays. I earned stories for English and things, and I used to win English prizes at school. So it was kind of always there.
Gotcha.
But I decided I wanted to be a research scientist, so that's what I went off and did. My degree is in biochemistry. My PhD is in molecular human genetics. But the gaming was always kind of there as an under thing. And it's all to do with transferable skills. It's
Right.
Project management, attention to detail, reading through reams of stuff to get the important information out of it, and then applying it. So, I mean, that's kind of like the meeting of the two worlds. It's what I used to do when I was at school, and then the training that I had in what we call transferable skills, because
Right.
you can go anywhere and you can do anything with a certain set of skills. And I think it's also the fact that I love learning. I used to teach in FE and HE, so further education and higher education. And the big slogan at the time was lifelong learning. And the thing is that you are always learning, or you should at least always be learning. And it may not necessarily be big things or specific subjects, but there's always more out there that you can learn. And pretty much most of the things that we learn can be transferred and applied to other things. There's usually a way. Nothing you learn is ever going to really go to waste. There'll be some point in time you'll be able to use it.
Yeah. So, you've worked on several games, and I'd be curious, Lynne, if there's certain games, and obviously we're going to delve into Call of Cthulhu a lot. We're going to delve into Actung a lot, but I'd be curious if there's other games that you look at as games that were important to you as a creative person. So games where maybe you learned a lot or you were honing skills a lot. What are some big landmarks for you?
I'd say there were two others. One of them would be the Dying Earth role-playing game by Pelgrane Press.
Nice.
And one of them would be Blue Rose by Green.
So I would love to start with Dying Earth. So when you look at Dying Earth as far as being part of your progress, what did Dying Earth give to you, or what did you give to Dying Earth?
Well, we were playtesters for it. I've known Robin Laws for years now. It was really funny actually listening to your interview with John Harper, because of course he starts talking about Talis Lancer, and it's like, hang on, I must have been on the same message boards as you. This is really weird, because that's how I met Robin. That's how I met Rob Hines. So I used to, when I was distracted from my PhD, I would be arguing with Robin about what he was going to do to Talis Lancer. Because, that was the thing that I wrote for. That was how I got into gaming, was Talis Lancer, because
Wow.
I sent a couple of scenarios off to Wizards of the Coast after they'd purchased it. And then, they rang me. I went down to EuroGenCon and met them, and the rest, as they say, is indeed history.
Yeah.
And they paid for me to go to Gen Con in Milwaukee in '94 to run Teleslanta games for them and work on the booth, which was an amazing experience. So, I knew Robin. I ended up doing a research job in Toronto, partly due to Robin, because I was, the great story of British research is go work in a North American research lab because they're all awesome and they've got all this cool stuff, which is partly true. But I ended up in Toronto because I knew Robin lived there, and he said, yeah, come on, it's a great city to live in. And it was a great city to live in. It was a horrific job. It was dreadful. But I really enjoyed the year I lived there because I was part of Robin's group. We play tested all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
And it was a huge amount of fun. So, of course, I came back. We stayed friends. And when we learned that he was developing Dying Earth, we signed up to be play testers. So I was running it. And I played that with my husband, his best friend since childhood, and his partner. So, we had a lovely little group, and it worked really, really well. And that's what kind of got me back into actual writing.
Gotcha.
Because I was writing stuff for the Excellent Prismatic Spray. I was writing stuff for the supplements. I was taking part in. They had a Dying Earth play by mail for years, which was great. That we used to just sort of write utter nonsense in Vancian style to each other, it was huge fun, and it was very different to what I was doing at work in the research term. So it was a lovely kind of escape from that.
Yep. So was there a big push and pull for you, Lynne, as far as, your non-gaming professional career and you getting drawn into this world and you start creating for tabletop games? Was there a push and pull period for you?
I mean, there was. I stopped doing research because I didn't enjoy it anymore. Research can be incredibly frustrating unless you're lucky. So I was being drawn more towards the gaming. I wanted to retrain. I'd also developed an anaphylaxis to latex, which isn't great if you're working in a research setting.
I could see that.
Nitrile gloves were available, but they're expensive. So if you applied for jobs and it was kind of like, no, you're going to have to make this extra accommodation. It was kind of like, no, we'll go with the person we're not going to have, potentially die on us at any point in time. Great method of controlling students going into anaphylactic shock in the middle of a session, but I really couldn't recommend it as an overall classroom control technique, because that did happen once, and the students, bless them, always behaved ever after because they were terrified I was going to die on them. But I don't recommend that as doing anything more than once.
It's not very repeatable, is it?
It's not repeatable, no. It's really not. And science is all about repeatability. So.
Exactly. You tested that hypothesis, so no reason to test it again.
No. I just had enough. So I left. I tried to retrain as an embroiderer, as a sort of creative crafts teacher. Right at the point in time when the British government withdrew all funding for community teaching. So that I kind of ended up being forced back into the biological sciences because I had fallen out of love with them. Yeah. So I taught A-level, I taught entry programs to university degree programs for people who didn't have A-levels. A-levels are kind of like the high school qualifications that you need in Britain to get into university. So I did that for about another 8 years. And the politics of that just kind of got to me, and I was escaping more and more into gaming because, work was miserable. I was teaching some embroidery, but that was very much on the side because there just wasn't enough work to go around. And I specialise in historical embroidery techniques, hand sewing and things, which isn't particularly trendy. And the main reason for that is because sewing machines try to kill me every time I go near them. So, it's just not safe for anybody. So, I kind of, there came to this crisis point where it was a case of, I can't do the lecturing anymore because it's making me miserable. I've tried getting normal jobs with, normal with air quotes there.
Sure.
But as soon as people see my list of qualifications, they don't take me seriously.
Yeah.
Because they just assume I'm doing it for 5 minutes before I disappear off somewhere else. So it's kind of like, well, what else can I actually do? It's like, well, I can write a bit. I can organise my time. I've produced this game, maybe, financially we were in a secure enough position for me to be able to do that.
Nice.
And that was a very important part of it. If we hadn't been in a financially secure position, there's no way I could have done that. I'd have had to stay lecturing.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't have been able to take the chance.
No, wouldn't have been able to take the chance. Because let's face it, with a few exceptions, pretty much everybody in the gaming industry is freelance, and pretty much everybody has to have a normal job to be able to make ends meet, unless they've got a partner who's got a really well-paying, stable job, so they can take the time to go off and develop their career full-time.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about Blue Rose, which is a game that has always fascinated me. So when did Blue Rose come onto your radar?
Well, that was another one. This is all down to Robin. Robin always finds it highly amusing that as a Canadian, he has to get brutal and pushy and manage my career for me, because apparently I'm far too English and polite and won't do it myself.
He is such a character. We had him on the show. He's fantastic.
He is. He gave a speech at our wedding, that kind. So
wow.
we've been there. We've been there, friends for donkey's years now. So yeah, I do owe a lot to Robin. And so no, I got an email from Green Ronin saying, Blue Rose needs editing. The new edition of Blue Rose needs editing. Are you available? Would you be interested? And at the time, it landed at pretty much the right time, to be honest. It was between Actung Cthulhu and me starting to really heavily work with Chaosium. So it was a case of, that would be nice. I wonder where they got my details from. And I think it was Robin had been dropping hints. As far as I know, it was Robin dropping hints. They got me that. So that was wonderful, because I remember Blue Rose coming out the first time, but it kind of slid by me. Just because it was mostly D20 based and I wasn't really doing D20 stuff at that point in time. And then sort of I got this game, and I mean, let's face it, that Stephanie Puy-Munlaw's artwork is just so stunning. It's so visually arresting.
Yeah. And
in many ways, it kind of brought back happy Talislanta memories, because of course you had PD Breeding Blacks, absolutely stunning artwork for that, which was one of the things that drew me into it. So then I started discovering this incredible world and editing that and working together with first Steve Kenson and then Joseph Carricker, who are both extremely talented and wonderful people.
Yeah.
And it was just a really fun and interesting world to dive into and help develop and help get out there so that more people could play it.
Yeah, we had Steve on the show as well, another wonderful human being that walks this planet. And it's very interesting to me how unique Blue Rose is, and from not just mechanically, not just the world, but just kind of the audience that Blue Rose has collected. Like every time I bring up Blue Rose to somebody, you never hear somebody go, yeah, it's fine. Like either people are like, yeah, wouldn't touch it, have no interest, or they're like, oh my God, that's the greatest game that's ever been created. There's no middle ground with Blue Rose. So when you think about your time on Blue Rose, what do you think it did for you creatively? What did it do for you as far as honing your skills?
Again, it's a case of you learn to work with other people.
Yeah.
And this is it. It's no game is created in isolation unless you are creating your own little independent game and you can do everything. And, bigger games that you've got your artists, you've got your development team, you've got your layout people, you've got your marketing people. So it's all this team skills, getting to work with different people, learning. Again, it's learning different people's views and perspectives and lived experiences, which is, it's fascinating. Again, it's that shared world building.
Yeah.
It's learning how to build a different world, learning what you can do with that different world, looking at things at different perspectives, and sort of like challenging yourself to go outside what you know.
Right.
Not being afraid to do that. You're not going to get it right all the time. You don't. But hopefully, if you're in a team, other people will be there to show you what you do need to do and how to sort of improve your game and pick yourself up and head in the right direction. So again, it was more about it was teaching me more about flexibility and the fact that, just reinforcing that, you are never too old to learn. You can always pick up new things. You can always learn new skills. And again, honing the editing, the analytical side of things, which, to be fair, between me doing the research and then coming back to games writing and editing, it had kind of the analytical side of things had kind of dropped off a bit.
Sure.
but kind of like doing forensic analysis to make sure that the mechanics are right, and bits aren't missing, and everything is supporting each other. That was kind of getting that back up to speed again as well.
So, there's a spectrum. I mean, when we talk about creating for RPGs, there's two things, and they're married together. So I don't mean to separate them in a false way, but you've got the mechanics, right? The actual the nuts and bolts of it, and then you've got the narrative. And it's obvious to me your attraction to the narrative and your love of that. How much do you love about the mechanics, or are the mechanics something that are part of it and you use it, or do you get into the nitty gritty of that at all?
For the job I do, I have to get into the nitty gritty, at least for
Right.
me. I mean, the interesting thing is that you get some people who are full on all the story. That's it. That's their thing. And that's good. And then you get people who are well into the mechanics and, like figuring out all the probabilities and I've worked with people like that and I'm in awe of them. And then you get the people in the middle, kind of, I suppose, like me, where it's like, I absolutely adore the story and the story's brilliant. And I will go through the nitty gritty of the mechanics to kind of make sure they're supporting the storytelling that the game is after. But when I design my own systems, it's more about field and probabilities. I'm kind of, statistics side of the human genetics was always the bit I was rubbish at. So statistics and probabilities is kind of like, so I use very much by feel when I do that. But if there's a system
Gotcha.
already developed, I can tweak it. I can do various different things with it, but sort of like going for the crunchy is not really me in terms of system design, but I can use other people's crunchy stuff and I can
Very,
analyze
very
it and
nice.
see how it works. And then I can apply that and make it do things.
Well, it sounds like there was a lot of things that you picked up and got better at as you worked on Blue Rose. What was the most challenging, though? So again, looking back at it, what did you struggle with the most? And it sounds like you may have overcome it, but like, what was the one where you just either you fought or they fought you or you fought yourself and came out the other side?
I know. Me, Steve, and Joe didn't fight because we got on incredibly. We still do get on incredibly well. Like you said, they're just the sweetest people. There was a very good working relationship there. I think one of the most interesting ones that was a challenge was there was a scenario collection, and some of the writers were short story writers, and some of them were games writers. And it was interesting to see because you could tell the short story writers because they hadn't allowed any agency for the players to do anything. They were really great stories, but the characters were watching events unfold. So that was the challenge of showing short story writers how to let go of a lot of the creative control and use what they've got as a framework for other people's expression rather than dictating.
Yeah.
And some people got it. Some people really got it. I mean, it was new to them. They'd not thought about that. And then other people really struggled with it. So, that they are different skills. And if you want total control of a story, then yeah, you should be writing short stories. If you don't mind other people just taking it and doing all sorts of crazy stuff with it, then you'll be fine with game design and scenario design because you're prepared to let it go.
Yeah. And when you think about it, when we look at the last, 3-4 decades of game design, we almost see the same arc, right? Where we see things being very prescriptive, very GM centered at the very beginning. And then over time, it seems like all of us collectively as a player base and as consumers, as well as creators, getting more comfortable with that, which is absolutely fascinating.
I think part of it as well is because we did so much live role playing. There's this whole element of rules like stuff feeding in too. And I mean, just the fact, this is going to sound a terrible thing to admit, but my brain only retains systems as long as I'm working on them.
Yeah.
Because there's so much else going on in there. So I tend to forget rules quite a lot. So, rules light is great for me, or things that inherently make sense to my brain. So the age system seems to inherently make sense to my brain. And the BRP system inherently makes sense to my brain. So I retain bits of those, and I can freshen them up whenever I need them. But yeah, I think there's kind of, you've got a lot of people coming in from computer video games, you've got a lot of people coming in through cosplay, and they're used to these kind of almost invisible systems. So you do have to have a lot more storytelling, a lot more give and take. You're not relying on inherent crunch to get you through in the way that you kind of did in the 70s and 80s with things like Aftermath and Rollmaster and Spacemaster. I mean, I had a huge amount of fun playing Rollmaster and Spacemaster back in the day, but, like, it's not something I'd want to play now.
I completely agree. I mean, as a kid, I was a big GURPS guy, loved GURPS. But coming back to it as an adult, I picked up the newest version of GURPS, and I was like, I don't think I have time to get my mastery of the system again, and then I, would come across, speaking of Mr. Harper, I come across something like Blades in the Dark, and I'm like, I can consume this in one sitting and potentially even run it. Not necessarily great. It takes time, but it was very interesting to see that progression over time. And I think your point is fantastic as far as kind of understanding that arc. So guys, we're going to take another break. When we come back from this break, we're going to talk about a game that you've heard talked about on the show before. We, of course, had Chris Birch on the show to talk about this. And I was super excited when I knew we were going to be able to talk to Lynne, and that's going to be Actung Cthulhu. So we'll be right back. Right now is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content you're already getting for free. They'll go on and explain that by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we commit to not interrupting your episode of Tabletop Talk with such a plea. We pledge not to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month. Even if there's a link in this show's description, and there is, we won't ask you to click it and become a patron. We won't spend time yammering about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting those episodes without ad breaks, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode. We needed to clarify that we wouldn't do this type of solicitation. Time for a quick shout out to our most recent patrons. A big thank you goes out to Peter Sojek, Nathan E. Hoyle, Jimmy CZ, Wayne Peacock, Oliver Borden, Zachary Wills, J. Douglas Nielsen, Patrick Healy, Ifrit V. Diablo, Greg Packman, Eric Conrad, and Joe Root. Because of them and the 100+ other patrons, we're able to put out content to you on a regular basis. Thank you.
Hi there, this is Owen from the Nova Open, and I am a $5 patron of Third Floor Wars because I love supporting the whole Malifaux community. I want to help Craig and the whole Third Floor Wars team continue making the fantastic content that gets me through my daily commute. You should join me in supporting the show. Just pause this episode, head to patreon.com and search Third Floor Wars, or grab the link in the show notes. See you there.
So you mentioned you connecting with Chris and getting involved with Actung Cthulhu. Can we get a little bit more details about that? So at some point, you and Modiphius have no relationship, and then suddenly you do. What was the first reach out or connection?
This is one of those weird serendipitous things. I mentioned before Company of Crimson, which was our Victorian LARP that we did. And then when that storyline wrapped up, we went on to League of Crimson, which was 1920s LARPing. And then when that wrapped up, after a bit of a break, we started something called Codename Crimson, which was 1940s World War II. And, I'd been doing research and things for that, getting into that. And we were at Dragon Meet. I was about to quit my job. I'm not sure or either had just quit my job at that point. I actually might just have quit it. And Rich, my husband, was talking to Sarah Newton, and they were just chatting. I was running, I can't remember what I was running, but I was running a game, and I could hear them chatting away over my shoulder. And Sarah was talking about Actung Cthulhu, and I think Three Kings was out at that point. I don't think Heroes of the Sea was. But I could hear them chatting away about Codename Crimson. And then Sarah had said, well, Chris is planning on taking this up to a full game. get in touch. You know, if Lynn's sort of going to be doing some writing, tell her to get in touch. So I did. And I sent Cogs and Cakes in as the writing sample, you know, kind of like, this is what I can do. And I mean, originally, I was just going to be the research assistant. I wasn't going to do anything else. I was probably going to write one chapter of Shadows of Atlantis. I pitched for a chapter of Shadows of Atlantis. But then the framework that I kind of put it in, Chris really liked. So kind of ended up with the whole thing.
Wow.
But there was somebody else who was going to helm it. And I was going to be there to do all the research and produce all the notes, and then they were going to go write it. And then they backed out just before the Kickstarter started, and it was a case of pretty much everything's in place. You know, the art's in place with Dim Martin. You know, all the you know, sort of like all the structures. You've got writers lined up to come in on this sort of thing. Will you helm it?
Wow.
And you know, the arrogance of relative youth. I can't claim I was young, but you know, I just went, yeah, why not? You know, I've run research projects, might as well. And I remember when the Kickstarter went live, and it was a case of, gosh, wouldn't it be embarrassing if we don't actually make this £8,000? And then watching it galloping over the hill at a massive rate of noise.
Unbelievable.
And it was like, oh, blimey. So rather a lot of books later, several Ennies which are dangling down here next to the computer. Yeah, no, that was one heck of an experience.
I bet. So what condition was the game in when you were brought in and they said, yeah, just kidding, you're not going to be a research assistant. We want you to run the whole damn thing. What condition was everything in at that point?
Well, it was a case of, well, we know what books we want to do. We don't really have any outlines for them. We've got this Kickstarter campaign put together. We've got a bit of the world background because obviously Three Kings and Heroes of the Sea. So it was a case of, well, we want to develop the world. We want a core rule book for the keepers. We want an investigator's handbook. We want to do these setting books in various theatres of the war. We want a couple of big campaigns. Chris had organised crossovers with various companies, some of which were going to be written by the other companies' teams. Right. Some of them are going to be written by writers who'd worked for those companies. And then there was the core team, which, as far as I know, Michał was the only full-time employee. The rest of us were freelance. So there was me, Michał Cross, who was doing the design and layout, Dim Martin, who was doing the art, and Dave Bluer, who was the Savage Worlds rules guru. Because it was dual statted, it was BRP and Savage Worlds.
Yep.
So that was kind of it. We had authors attached to books, but no real outlines. So I kind of came in and I put together the outlines of what I wanted. I assigned it to the various authors, and we just kind of slowly but surely waded our way through the vast amount of stuff we had to do.
So there's an early concept of the game when you come in, right? So Chris knows, right? It's all in his head. He has an idea of what it wants to be. And then we go to the end when it's being delivered and people start using it. How much did we see his vision change, or was it there the whole time, or did the game change over time as it developed? And when I say game, I mean the world, everything.
I mean, as far as I know, it was still, I mean, obviously because Chris was putting bits into the books, but he was very hands-off in that respect. Me and Dave had the big conversation with Chris and Sarah at the beginning about what their views on the world were, where they saw things going, and we tried to be as faithful to that as possible. Chris had final say on all of the books, so I'm assuming he was happy with what we were doing. He never said he wasn't. Right. I take that as a win. So yeah, I like to think that we delivered on that original vision. I mean, obviously it won't have been identical because both Dave and myself and all the authors put in our own individual little bits of spin on various things. And nothing that a gamer touches ever remains unchanged.
True.
These things have a tendency to metamorphose under their own steam, and there's nothing you can do to stop that.
Yeah. So you have a timer going, right? So the Kickstarter's out there and there's a promise of delivery. There's dates that are, written in pen. What is it like, or what was it like to work under that level of, the pressure must have been immense.
To a certain extent. The key thing was, and this was this was the good thing, was that Chris was more concerned that we put out a really good quality product than hitting a set date.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we did end up with a huge amount of stuff we needed to write. It was 12 books in the end.
Unbelievable.
And it was still the same. At the end of the day, there were still the four of us at the centre that had to go through everything. So that, you know, there's only so many hours in the day. So, you know, it was just a case of just plodding steadily through it, making sure that we were producing good, high quality books, and, you know, keeping people informed.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, with anything that size, it gets hit by all sorts of things. I mean, my dad died unexpectedly just as the Keeper's Guide came in for editing. So obviously that, as an only child, I had a whole load of things to do with his estate to sort out. Various of the other writers lost parents or close family members during that time. So they, you know, there were several of them were very ill. So, you know, you had all these real world things piling in, but keeping people informed, you know, people were aware that we hadn't just disappeared and that things were coming. So we did manage to get things out on a fairly steady basis.
Right.
I mean, okay, you know, the original deadlines went sailing by. But, you know, we were still putting out 4 or 5 books a year, which is a lot.
It is a lot. That's incredible. So the one thing that fascinates me in this process, Lynne, is understanding or knowing what I call the pencils down moment is, right? Because you can develop stuff like this in perpetuity, right? There's always more. There's always things, edges that can be sand or things that can be glued on. And we can use Actung Cthulhu as a maybe as a model for that. Like, when do you get the feeling like, okay, we're done? This book is finished and I'm not going to look at it again, and we're going to get it printed, which means I can't change it. I wonder, I'm trying to get a sense of when you feel like that feeling comes about, that moment where you're like, I'm good.
Oh gosh, I mean, that's something I honestly cannot tell you. You just kind of know. It's the same as how much research is enough. It's kind of like, you know, and it is different for every single project. I mean, some books, it took a lot more work to get them where I wanted them to be. Other books were there pretty much instantaneously. They kind of just seemed to know what they wanted to be, and then just kind of like did their thing. And it's you just kind of learn when it's the right time. Although, to be fair, again, Dave Bluer, it was great working with him. He always insisted that you never released a book. It escaped into the wild, which is very true. It's completely true. And it doesn't matter how many times you go over it and how much you look at it. As soon as it's published, you pick up the book, you open a random page, and there's this glaring typo or thing that's missing, and you just go, ugh.
Oh, it's so funny.
Although for over 6 months, nobody noticed we'd actually completely got the wrong stats in a table, which was great.
Well, there's just so much, and it's why fresh eyes can be so important in that process too, right? To put it in front of somebody who hasn't been there through the whole thing, to grab onto that. That's incredible. So guys, we're going to take another break, and we're going to move along the Lovecraftian path, but this time we're going to talk about Lynne partnering up with Chaosium. We'll be right back.
There are so many online retailers. It can be hard to find one that is trustworthy, has great prices, along with some reliable customer service. On the third floor, we love ordering our gaming goodies from Gadzooks Gaming. Their selection of terrain, miniatures, dice, custom decor, and conversion bits are curated for gamers by gamers. You'll find they have what you need and what you didn't know you needed to take your gaming fun to the next level. If you mention Third Floor Wars in the cart notes of your order, you'll also get a free gift. And you'll help support the podcast. Check out gadzooksgaming.com and mention Third Floor Wars on checkout to get that free gift.
So we talked at the very, very beginning about where you are with Chaosium, but at some point you had no connection with them. So let's talk about that handshake. When did you come on their radar, or they came on your radar?
Well, quite early in the Actung days, because obviously Actung Cthulhu was a licensed product.
Yeah.
Nothing could be
right.
released without Chaosium say so.
Yep.
Because obviously they're trying to make sure that you're not doing anything that's misrepresenting them or putting them in a bad light. So I was sending books off to Mike all the time, Mike Mason.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't really know him. And I'd seen him at conventions talking about 7th edition and things. So, I was sending books off to him for approval. He liked me because I was delivering stuff. And if there was anything that needed changing, I would do it quickly and get it back to him for approval. We worked together to try and lay in as much kind of 7th edition, pre-7th edition stuff as we could in terms of some of the difficulty levels, so that when the time came, it would be less difficult to sort of like convert between the two. I mean, if Pulp Cthulhu had been out at the time, let's face it, Actung Cthulhu would have been a Pulp Cthulhu game. There's no two ways around it. That was very much its sensibilities. But we did what we could to sort of facilitate that up until the point. So no, I mean, I was working in that respect with Mike from the moment we started putting books out, and that relationship developed from there, really.
So when did the relationship go to the next level, Lynne?
Okie dokie. Well, I left Modiphius in about 2015 because I think it was all bar 2 of the Kickstarter books were out. I'd done everything that I felt I could for the line. Those 2 books were in other hands. They were going to make it past the goalpost without me. I mean, I'd already fired myself as line editor months before because I needed to get Shadows of Atlantis written because it just wasn't happening because I was too busy managing all the other books. So, I'd already sacked myself. So I kind of, the Modiphius work sort of ramped down. I was working on Blue Rose. And then Mike came to me and was sort of like, offering me bits and bobs. And obviously, was it 2015, around the same time, Moon Design took over Chaosium. And Robin intervened again, as is his wont. Funnily enough, we had the Modiphius booth at Gen Con opposite the Chaosium booth, and because Moon Design had just taken over. And I was like, I really should go over and talk to them, but it kind of seems a bit rude.
Sure. Don't look behind me, just talk to me.
Yeah. Hello, it's me, talk to me. Don't you know who I am? And I never expect anybody to know who I am, because, people don't tend to read who's written stuff and who the creative teams are, So, yeah, it's always a real surprise when anybody actually knows who I am. But no, I was sort of like, and I'd gone over to the Pelgrane booth to talk to Robin and Ken, and Robin had gone, have you talked to the new Chaosium owners yet? And I'd gone, no. And he's like, right. And he literally route marched me back across the trading hall, presented me to Jeff, basically went, hello, Jeff, this is Lynne Hardy. I hire her. I nearly hit the floor. Wasn't used to Robin saying things like that.
Isn't that funny?
And then kind of had to have a conversation with Jeff whilst stunned.
So I'd be curious, Lynne, and we don't have to get into it if you don't want to, but what is that conversation like? So Robin just drops you off and takes
runs
off.
Away, yeah.
Yeah. I'd be very curious kind of because, you're feeling him out. He's trying to feel you out. And I'd be curious what that conversation's like.
Well, I mean, I had met Jeff a couple of times before at various UK conventions, but it had been a long, long time. And sort of like Jeff's known Robin for years. They're really good friends. So, kind of an introduction like that means that some of the hard work is done because on someone else's word, you kind of don't have to necessarily prove yourself as much. So there's kind of that kind of awkward step is sort of taken care of, not completely. But it was just we sat down and Jeff said, well, what sort of thing do you want to do? And I mean, at the time, I had a ton of research that I'd done for Shadows of Atlantis that had never got used. And I hadn't actually learnt my lesson at that point that it's only really lunatics that write gigantic world-spanning solo adventures on their own. So I went, well, I'd kind of really like to do one kind of based here. And he went, well, go home, do some bits of research, pitch it, send it to Mike. And then I worked with Mike to get the pitch right and then started writing Shadows of Atlantis. And then Mike came to me and went, we're going to be updating Masks of Nyarlathotep and we're going to split it between people. And I'd like you to be involved in this. it'd mean you taking some time off from Shadows of Atlantis, because obviously it's going to be a full-on job, but I don't think it's going to take too long. Famous last words.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, well, I really would like to get not Shadows of Atlantis, I really would like to get Children of Fear finished, but I'm only going to get this chance once.
Yeah.
So I can't actually say no.
Yeah.
I've got to go for it. So Children of Fear went on hold, which the first of many times over the years. And I went to work on Masks, and I think that was what really cemented my reputation in being able to deal with complex projects, because it was a complex project and it took way longer than all of us thought was going to take. And then after that, I was from there, I was freelance, effectively working as assistant associate editor, sort of like shepherding projects over the finishing line. And then 2 years ago, I think it's 2 years ago, I mean, time has lost all meaning, let's face it, over last year. About 2 years ago, I was actually taken on full-time on staff.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And how much changes for you at that point, Lynne, going from freelance to full-time?
It's really nice to have a paycheck every month again.
I would imagine.
But again, it's one of those really weird things, because we've always budgeted our lives based on only one of us ever having a full-time job.
Right.
Always. Because I was in research science, unless you get tenure, the best you're looking at is a 3-year research grant. There is no real stability there. You're hopping from short-term contract to short-term contract, anything from 3 months to 3 years, So, no, I mean, we've been incredibly fortunate in the fact that it's worked out for us. Let's face it, gaming is pretty much our entire voice. And gin. No, I mean, we live very much within our means, and me having that extra wage means that we can save up for my retirement. Not that it's ever likely to happen. But because of the various careers I have virtually nothing really in the way of a pension. So it's kind of like, It's nice to have that money now to be able to try and put it away for a rainy day. And just be able to go on nice holidays as and when we're allowed to do that again, when it's safe to do so, and go to conventions and sort of like catch up with all our friends.
Yeah. That's amazing. So one thing I think it would be interesting for us to learn is your view of the mythos and your view of the entire ecosystem of Lovecraft. So there's a point where and we've talked about it, where you didn't work on any of that, right? So you may have been as a player and as a consumer of the products. And then now, I mean, it's been your life, right? And you've been just, it's over the nose in it. What has changed for you as far as your understanding, your feelings? Do you look at it all now differently than you did before?
Yes. I think, once you're that deep on the inside, you kind of have to, and you certainly do. But I mean, the key thing that I always take from the mythos is the fact that right from its beginnings, it was a shared world. And that's exactly what we're doing with it. It's a shared world for people to tell their own stories in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's funny, I guess I've never really thought about how far ahead of the curve Lovecraft was when he did create kind of this shared world. I mean, I guess I've never thought about that. That's very interesting.
He got a heck of a lot of things totally and horrifically wrong. But that shared world building was something that I think is reflected very, very well in the game.
So here's a question that I talked a little bit about to Dennis Detwiller, who's a part of the team over putting out Delta Green. And it's very interesting to me because, you sit me down as somebody who has consumed everything Lovecraft for decades now. And I can sit in one chair and talk to people about, just how incredible the world, him as a writer. Unbelievable, the innovations and the things that he was doing that changed literature literally change things. And then if I need to, I can go into another chair and talk about what a horrible human being he was in many respects. And I'd be curious, as somebody who, again, is producing in this shared world, do you reconcile that at all? Or how do you deal with the problematic aspects of Lovecraft?
Well, for a start, you have to acknowledge them. You can't pretend they're not there.
Yeah.
He was not a pleasant person. He hated pretty much everybody, distrusted pretty much everybody, was obviously a very lonely and miserable man, and you know, lashed out at everything he didn't see as familiar, and you know, let's face it, straight white wasp.
Yep.
You know, it's sort of which is desperately sad, because he did have this prodigious imagination. He did have this ability to tell really weird, unsettling stories. So you have to acknowledge it, but you also have to accept that, you know, it's not his world any longer. And it
Nice.
never really was entirely from the beginning. It was this shared world. And it's our mythos now. And it's up to us to shape it and change it and bring other people into it who might not have thought about it before, precisely because of who Lovecraft was.
Yep.
And learn from them, listen to their stories. And again, this is this whole, you're never too old to learn. Getting other people's perspective on things deepens your own understanding, deepens your own engagement, allows you to see things from a different perspective. And that's all incredibly valuable, and it just enriches the world.
And just claiming it as your own, I think, is a wonderful way to put it. And not tearing it away, and just say, you know what, it's not his anymore. It's now everybody's, and it's part of it. I think that's a fascinating way to look at it. So you finish this huge 2-volume, gorgeous source book adventure. I mean, it's just everything. It's an amazing piece of work. Then it sounds like we get to go back to Children of Fear. So for those listening, one, I'm going to preempt this by saying I'm such a fan. So everybody listening is going to hear me fanboy a little bit. But can we give people that aren't as familiar as I am with it, can we give them a sense of what Children of Fear is?
It's a large, not continent spanning, but definitely multi-country spanning campaign set in China, Central Asia, Northern India and Tibet, set in the 1920s for classic Cthulhu. I can't really go into too much more detail because there's an awful lot of spoilers there.
I know. We got to be really careful about that.
Very careful
really
about that
careful.
one. But basically the investigators are all recruited because the archaeologist, historian Langdon Warner has sent a telegram asking for help to be sent urgently to the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas at Tunhuang in Central Asia.
What could go wrong?
Absolutely nothing. It's a perfectly jolly little romp, you know. It's like it's nice. It's kind of like Takenoko, you know. Is it Takenoko? No, Tokaido. The beautiful board game where you're just going for a lovely walk and collecting tourist stuff along the way. Got a Cthulhu, nothing's going to go wrong.
Oh, that's great. So I would be fascinated, especially now having a better sense of your background, Lynne. What was the research like for that? What were some big things that you were like, wow, I did not know that?
Oh, did quite a lot.
I bet.
Huge amounts. But this is another one of those really weird ones where it started out, I thought it was going to be one thing, and then it totally changed into something else.
Interesting. So what did it start as? What did you think it was going to be?
I had all this stuff on bits of northern India, but I thought it was going to be mostly set in southern India because there was a whole load of research that I'd done for Shadows of Atlantis. There was all this sorts of stuff about, you know, sort of like the origins of language and weird things, like forts going off under the sea and all sorts of stuff down in sort of like southern India. And then I started looking at things and, talking to Jeff about the Taklamakan Desert and various other things and stuff in Tibet. And I started doing more research on the areas that sounded interesting. And then, of course, Journey to the West kept cropping up, which, as I already mentioned at the beginning, Monkey. I grew up watching the Monkey TV series, which was, great. Everybody used to run around the playground going with the fingers and summoning the cloud and running around fighting each other. And, so like that kept cropping up. And something else, which I'm not going to mention because it would totally give the game away, also kept cropping up whenever I was researching various places. And it was like, no, this is telling me what it wants to be.
Interesting.
And I can either try and force it to be what I want to be, which is going to be a really hard job. And this is going to be enough of a job anyway. Or I can actually listen to what the research is telling me and go that way. And I followed the research.
Interesting. So as you started to do that, Lynne, and it starts to take form, and I think it's very interesting for you to be in a situation where you had to set it down for a while and come back. So I'd be curious, when you picked it back up again, and we talked about fresh eyes to a certain degree with fresh eyes, was there some big changes that happened or a mindset flip after you'd taken a break and picked it back up again?
Well, again, I've got more experience for a start, it's still more writing, more experience, more like honing the kind of things that work for Call of Cthulhu, the sorts of things that might appeal to people. So yeah, there's always changes. Things are always evolving as you're writing. You have your pitch to work from, but as you write things, ideas come up that, just sort of, because you've got things percolating around in the back of your brain. Yep. It's sort of like chugging away subconsciously, putting the pieces together. So, and all of a sudden you'll get this little light bulb moment. It'll go, oh, if you do that, and it's like, well, it's not in the pitch, but that's actually way more interesting. Let's do that.
Interesting.
And then of course you play test it, and your players come up with way better ideas than you ever will do, because again, you've kind of got too close to it, and you're not seeing things. So you with their blessing, you swipe all this really awesome stuff that they've just done for you, and then you work that in too. So that it's this organic process of research, writing, testing. I mean, I try to get as much of the research done as possible before writing, so I've got a good idea of where things are going. But I mean, it was almost 2 years off on masks, so that was a lot to come back and pick up. And it's always weird when I do go back and read stuff that I've written, because it's always like somebody else did it.
I bet.
It's very odd. So yeah, it took a little bit of while to get back up to speed. And of course, at that point, I'm also editing and working on a whole load of other books. So it's kind of chugging along in the background while other things are also happening. So I'm splitting my time, which is one of the reasons why it took 5 years pretty much to get out, because, having that management type role, you can't just devote yourself purely to one book. You are working on multiple projects at a time that you have to juggle to keep everything going, because we have a very insatiable fan base who are wonderful. Thank you for paying my wages. But we have to keep putting stuff out there so for them to consume.
Yep, no question. So Children of Fear gets out. It's released. It's finally, it escapes, as we said earlier, right? I'm always fascinated as a creator to understand what it's like for it to be in the wild. So once it's out there, people are posting videos about it. They're doing reviews of it. There's blog posts about it. People love it. People are frustrated by it. I'd be curious, as all of that's happening and it's no longer under your control, was there anything that surprised you? And it could be, anything, good, bad, people that did something with it that you didn't expect. Was there any surprises once it was in the wild?
Oh, there's always surprises. And the weird thing is, and I don't know if any other authors get this, but it's always weirdly slightly anticlimactic once it's out.
Interesting.
Because it's kind of like, oh, that's it then. That's 5 years of my life. Where did that go?
My kid just went to college.
It's just like, oh, it's gone. So yeah, it's a really weird feeling, and then there's kind of that lag between you suddenly realizing that it has escaped, and then feedback starting to come in, and it's one of those weird things that you deep in your soul that you're never going to make everybody happy, and it's never going to be attractive to everybody. So it's always nice when people do really love it and do really take to it. And I've had some really lovely feedback. I've had some really, it's very embarrassing and humbling feedback. Being British, any form of praise is quite terrifying and embarrassing. But it's been compared to Masks, which is
big deal.
Yeah. Obviously I'm not sure I can claim that. But it's very nice other people think it might be. but like you said, deeply surprising. And then, there are some people who don't like it, and that's because you literally cannot please everybody all of the time, and the wonderful thing about the state of gaming at the moment is that just because that doesn't work for them doesn't mean that there isn't something else out there that will. And there will be, and that's the joy of it. There is so much great stuff available and so many different tastes catered to now that you're kind of not just stuck with one thing, and if you don't like it, you kind of, well, that's it. You're just going to have to suck it up and deal with it. But no, I mean, the feedback that I've had has been predominantly positive. It is lovely to see the way that people are working it into their continuing campaigns and how they're integrating it with other scenarios and campaigns and standalone things so that they can transport existing characters over to it. And some of the creativity that's out there in terms of doing this, it's wonderful to see.
It's amazing.
It's really beautiful to see.
So Lynne, often called the golden age of role-playing right now. People, it's more popular than it's ever been before. It was in a completely different state than when I left it 25 years ago, and it was a wonderful thing to come back to. Lastly, I would be real curious, is there something about where we are now or where we're headed as players, as producers, as an industry and as a hobby that is really exciting for you? Is there something that makes you happy, so excited, something to look forward to?
Yes, it's seeing a whole load of new young gamers coming in and claiming their territory, marking their territory, getting their wares out there to share with people, sharing their ideas. As we've already mentioned, seeing people from different backgrounds with different experiences, creating their games and sharing their experiences, enriching the whole spectrum of gaming. And it's amazing to see. It's wonderful to see because you're getting all these new ideas. Yeah. And it challenges you to sit down and look at what you've done and go, well, not all of this applies to me, but what of that can I use to inform my gaming and make me a better writer, better editor, better player? What is going to help me tell the sorts of stories that I want to tell with my friends? And I think that is the joyous thing, is to see all of these younger people coming in and doing gaming their way. It's not stagnant, it's changing, it's evolving, and it's a beautiful thing.
It's funny for me, I'm 50 next year. And I played old D&D. I played, I can't even know what edition of Call of Cthulhu was my first edition of Call of Cthulhu. I really love, to a certain degree, saying, you know what, this isn't my hobby anymore. I'm going to hand this over now in a weird way. And I love what everybody's doing with it. So there's games that I have come across, Lynne, that challenge me on many levels. And I'm really pleased at how happy it makes me, because we have seen some fighting happening and some reluctance to, and the what I call the grognards saying, well, that's not how we did it. And, to a certain degree, I feel like the same way with popular music. I'm like, popular music is not my music anymore. Yeah. It's not made for me anymore. And I'm not supposed to like it. And to a certain degree, I've kind of accepted that about our hobby as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. The whole point is that, we're an aging population. I mean, and one of the lovely things I do love seeing is generational gamers. You have grandparents gaming with their grandchildren. So I've run scenario sessions at conventions for grandparents playing games with their grandchildren. And that's a beautiful thing to see. You've got 3 generations of families gaming together. Yeah. And that's it. But yeah, you're completely right. But the whole point is just that because we're not the target demographic anymore doesn't mean that our games aren't still there. Nobody's taken them away. Nobody's saying that you can't play them that way anymore. Yep. You game your way, just don't make it so that other people can't game their way.
Don't get in the way.
Yeah, precisely.
Yep. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Lynne, I cannot thank you enough for taking some time on a Saturday and blabbering on with me like this. Obviously, everything that we've talked about, I'm going to have linked in the show notes. So everybody right now, you can scroll down, go buy Children of Fear. And if you don't like it, that's on me, because I'm telling you, you're going to. But for people that would want to get more Lynne outside of the links that we're going to share, is there places where they can go to stay connected with you or learn more about you?
Oh, if you're quite prepared to sort of read about me whiffling on about various projects, totally anonymously, because obviously I'm not allowed to name them while I'm working on them, gin, embroidery, random TV ramblings, you can find me on Twitter at Cogs and Cakes.
Wonderful. We'll have a link to there.
I used to have a blog every month, but I kind of gave up writing it a couple of years ago because it just it all just got a bit too depressing at the beginning of last year.
And there's other things you're supposed to be writing, Lynne.
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Lynne. We're going to have to come up with an excuse to have you on again.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much
Wonderful.
for having me. It's been lovely.
And for those of you that sat around all the way to the end and you're still listening, I appreciate you too. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Hey, did you hear that? You leveled up. You finished another episode of Tabletop Talk from Third Floor Wars. If you want more from the third floor, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Head on over to our YouTube channel. It is packed with painting tutorials, gaming tips, battle reports, and role-playing actual plays. Did you enjoy this episode? Why don't you send a link to one of your friends so they can enjoy it too? Last but not least, write us a review on your podcatcher of choice. This helps us find listeners almost as cool as you.
How are you on time, Lynne? I don't want to take up too...
I'm absolutely fine. No,
Wonderful.
Saturdays is lovely.
Okay, good.
Because we have we all kind of get together over. It's not Zoom. Which one is it? I think it's Facebook or something. We all get together. So it's all the gaming people I did Company of Crimson and Codename Crimson and things with. We have movie night. So we line up something on Netflix or Amazon, and we have Facebook Messenger open, and then we're watching the film synchronously and typing sarcastic comments to each other, MST3K kind style.
It's your own MST3000, right?
Yeah.
That's great. So what's tonight's movie?
Not sure. Probably Hairspray.
Very nice. Oh, God, I haven't seen that in forever.
Yeah, it was actually filmed just down the road from where I used to live in Toronto.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that funny? God, I remember I was a kid and in high school working at a video store, and pretty sheltered life. And I'll never forget the first time I saw Hairspray. I'm like, I have never seen anything like this before, and I really like it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we'd be watching the musical version, which obviously is a lot. I've seen both, but yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. That's funny. All right, I'll bring us back. Well, he was another fascinating interview, Chris. Chris's background and how he ended up being where he is just amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to tell you, I am so delighted at, like, I have yet to meet a bad human being as I've gone through these interviews and bugged people. And I feel like my audience must be like, yes, Craig, we know you like that person too. Okay, Craig. like, haven't you had a bad interview? And the only interviews that I've struggled with were tabletop gaming interviews. Every once in a while, I'll have a guest that I struggle with, but man, when I talk to RPG people, it's just the greatest, which makes me happy. All right, let's bring us back. With that, which is absolutely fascinating. So, guys, we're gonna go ahead, please. Nope. Oh,
well, I think part of it as well is because we did so much live role play.
That's what we're going to do with Lynne today. So let's take a quick break. And we come back from this break, talk about troubling content creators. We're going to talk a little bit about what. God, I effed that up. Sorry. Pelgrane Press and Green Ronin. She is known. She is now in a leadership role. I saw Lovecraft and thinking that's where we were going to Lovecraft, and then I just messed the whole damn thing up.
The joy of editing. This is the brilliant bit.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we used to fluff up all the time when we were doing the Doctor Who podcast, so it was great to actually be able to go back and just cut stuff out.
I agree. So to a large degree, Lynne, this next segment, I would really like to follow you more than anything. So I want to talk about Cogs, Cakes, and Swordsticks because I'm not familiar with it. Mm-hmm. So I'm dying to learn about it. But where we go from there is really up to you. And, the idea being is I would love to touch on things that you feel were important to you as a creator, important to you as far as learning and your process and things like that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So
Wonderful.
I will flag up that then we'll be bringing Dying Earth in. That was where
nice.
I don't ask me anything about the system. I can't remember. It's been years, and my brain does not hold that information well.
Sure. Sure, boy, that's been getting I saw the Kickstarter for the
Dungeon Crawl Classics, isn't it?
The DCC, yeah, the DCC version. That's there seems to have been some demand there based on the funding level that's getting. It's incredible. Speaking of which, how about the Chaosium?
I know, it's great, isn't it?
It makes me so happy. It just makes me happy. All right, I'll bring us back. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over, and you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast, too, while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.